Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, take your seats, please. We'll wait 10 seconds for the last people coming back in from the brunch. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? My name is Nick Butts. I'm an MPA 2018, a member of the HKS Fund Executive Council, and a very proud HKS alum. I've got a question for you as part of my introduction to our speaker. Do you want to be special? Or do you want to be happy? Good. So I think we achieved what we needed. In the last couple of days, it's been really exciting to connect with alumni from my own class, from other classes, hear about weddings, babies, people who have passed, but also people who have accomplished amazing things. At HKS, everyone who comes here is what our speaker would call a striver. We're told before we come to the Kennedy School, while we're at the Kennedy School, and after we graduate the Kennedy School, that we're special. And having talked to a lot of you guys over the last couple of days, we really are. Like, there's so many really impressive alumni who have done amazing things. And being the strivers that everyone here is, we continue to chase that dopamine high of external recognition of being called special. You're doing good, you're doing great, you're doing amazing things. But are we happy? Here to talk about whether we're happy or not is our speaker, Arthur C. Brooks. Arthur is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of Practice of Public Leadership at the Kennedy School, the school across the river that shan't be named. He is a professor of management practice. Arthur was, prior to coming to faculty, the president of the American Enterprise Institute, one of the leading public policy think tanks in DC and in the world. He's an award-winning, best-selling author of 11 books. A couple of my favorites, Love Your Enemies, From Strength to Strength, which is the title of the talk today. And then very excitingly, and I know this is public, you're about to co-author a book with Oprah Winfrey about building the life that you want. He has an amazing column, if you haven't read it, at in The Atlantic. And he's also the host of podcasts, The Art of Happiness and How to Build a Happy Life. Most importantly, it is Arthur's birthday today. And so, with that, please welcome our speaker, Arthur C. Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that incredibly gracious introduction, and welcome to all of you back to our beloved Kennedy School. Thank you for the support that you give our school, our faculty, our students. The fact that we do well as a school every single year is because of the distinction of our very special alumni. And we'll see if you're happy in the next hour or so. I'm very much looking forward to this session. I have been writing and thinking and speaking about the science of happiness over the past 4 years since I came back to academia. I have a laboratory here, a lab here at the Harvard Kennedy School called the Leadership and Happiness Laboratory. We specialize in teaching leaders in business and nonprofits and governments and politics and in communities and in families how they can be happiness teachers as well. And I want to give you a little taste of that today, but I want to talk about it in a different way than I do with my graduate students. Now, I have a class across the river, I'll name it, Harvard Business School. I love them too. I have a class called Leadership and Happiness. I teach happiness at the Harvard Business School, and I study and do research on it here at the Harvard Kennedy School. People ask me what I do for a living, like they do you. When you meet somebody for the first time, when they want to get a little window into your soul, here in the United States at least, they ask what you do. It's different in different countries. I spent half of my adult life in Spain and half here. In Spain, they ask you where you're going on vacation, which is it's a healthier question for happiness, I will say. But here they say, what do you do? And I say, I teach at Harvard. And they say, oh, what do you teach? And I say, I teach happiness. And they think I'm lying. But no, I'm going to tell you what I teach and why I do it, but I'm going to talk about it specifically for you, graduates, some of whom are not even in the first half of your life. As you heard, today's my birthday, and I'm turning 59, in case you're wondering, and it turns out that's not the first half of my life anymore. Actuarially, the odds of getting to 118 seem kind of low. But I want to tell you what I've learned about the science of happiness and how you can apply it to your life, to your personal life, to your family life, and to you as leaders. We are in the leadership business. We would not have distinction, as I said before, if it weren't for your leadership. But you can't leave your own happiness and that of others up to chance. Now, before I came here to the Harvard Kennedy School, I was, as you heard, I was the CEO of a big think tank in Washington, D.C. And it was a great job, I have to say. I mean, it was going well and I liked it. And, you know, being the president of a think tank sounds really intellectual, but actually there's not that much thinking in tanks. It's mostly traveling around, giving speeches and asking people for money. So what I had to do is I was giving about 175 speeches a year in those days, and I had to raise about $50 million a year. And so I was always on the plane. And I have to tell you, about 5 years into my 10 years as CEO, I was having a bit of a personal existential crisis. Here's how it worked, and some of you can relate to this if you're anywhere near my age. You're doing well in your career. You like it, it's going well, but you start to wonder, where is it going? I mean, what's the cadence of my career? Am I going to do this and do it a little bit better and make a little bit of progress every year and at some point have to stop because I don't have the energy or I get a nudge? And then what? Golf? You know? I don't want to do that. I literally don't have any hobbies. And I started thinking to myself, where is my life going? And I didn't have an answer to that. Well, one night, I had an experience that changed my life. I was on an airplane from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., to Dulles Airport. It was a route that I flew a lot to go see my donors. And in the middle, it was a nighttime flight. It was about 11 o'clock at night. So it was dark, and you know, people were watching the movie or sleeping or whatever. But I heard a conversation behind me on the airplane. I couldn't see the people because it was dark. But I could hear the conversation, and I could tell by their voices it was a man and a woman. I could tell that they were elderly by the sound of their voices, and by the nature of the conversation, I assumed that they were probably a married couple. You'll see why. Now, I couldn't quite make out the husband's words, but the wife's voice was very penetrating and coming right through the seats. So he says, higher pitch, and I got it. And so he says, and she says, don't say it would be better if you were dead. Whoa. Now, I'm not trying to eavesdrop, but I have to tell you, as a social scientist, I got my PhD listening to people's conversations and trying to figure out why they do what they do. My laboratory is overheard conversations. You know, if you're behind me in the line in the Starbucks and you're confessing to the person next to you that somebody broke your heart, keep your voice down, you know? It might be my next book. So I hear this, and man, I'm super attentive at this point. Scientific interest, mind you. And then I hear him, and she says, it's not true nobody loves you or remembers you anymore. Like, whoa. So I started thinking to myself, who's this guy? Here's who he's not. Not one of you. He is not one of our graduates. He is not somebody who lived up to his education expectations or those of his parents. He did not get the jobs that he wanted. He did not have the leadership that he wanted. And now it's the end, and he's disappointed about his life. So it seemed. Made perfect sense. Okay, they finished the conversation. I go back to work on my laptop, and we land at Dulles Airport about an hour later, and the lights go on, and we all stand up, and I'm thinking, I'm kind of curious. I want to get a little look. So I turn around to get a look at the sad man, and it's one of the most famous men in the world. This is literally somebody you all know. This is not some politician or actor or entertainer. No. This is an authentic American hero who changed the course of life for people all around the world for good in the 1960s and 1970s. And I heard him confessing to his wife that he might as well be dead. Now, this is blowing my mind as a social scientist. Why? Because the world gives you, Mother Nature gives you a formula for being happy. Here's how you do it. You want to be happy when you're old? Here's how you do it. Work hard, succeed spectacularly, take every single opportunity, bust your pick for decades, bank it, die happy. That's what the world tells you. But that guy was saying something different, and he's doing 10x what I'm ever going to do with my life. And remember, this comes at a time of sensitivity for me, because I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life as a leader. So I'm thinking, either that model is wrong, or this guy's broken. Which is it? I go home and I confess this to my wife, Esther, who knows I'm going through a thing. I said, honey, I had this experience with this guy in the plane. She said, that guy? Wow. I mean, he's a hero. And I said, I know. We were leaving the plane, and the pilot stopped. He was right behind me. He looked through me like a pane of glass. And he said to the guy, sir, you've been my hero since I was a little boy. And he was beaming with pride. And so I said to Esther, my wife, frankly, I don't want to be having that conversation with you in 30 or 40 years. I don't want to. What do I do? And she said, what do you mean, what do you do? You study this. Do you have a PhD or what? Right? I mean, isn't that what you do? And I said, yeah, kind of. I could actually study that. And so I set about working on it. Now, I had never thought of analyzing me as a social scientist, never. I had never done actual research on my problems, but I did. And I worked on it for 7 years. And I cracked the code, and I want to share it with you now. So here's the thing. You can be living your best life up to your earthly potential, and you can get happier as you get older. But beware, it doesn't happen on its own. Why was the man on the plane so unhappy? Well, I'm going to talk about that. But here's the problem that we all have. If you live according to nature's dictates for you, you will not be on the right path. Quite the contrary. What I learned is that Mother Nature lies to us. And those lies are accelerated in our economy and in our culture. What we do is not a path toward happiness. The path toward success and the path toward happiness diverge, unless we undertake a series of relatively unnatural but absolutely positive actions that I'm going to share with you in this hour. Okay, now when I started this research, again, this was not public. I had no intention of sharing this with anybody. I had a folder full of notes that my wife found a couple of years later, and she said, you should publish this. Turns out a lot of people are interested in this. And as I was doing this work, I started off like I always do as a social scientist. I got a level set of what's ordinarily going on with this question. Here's the question. As people get older, do they generally get happier or do they generally get unhappier? Okay, I just want to know across the population, on average, what happens to people. So I gathered a lot of data. It turns out there's a lot of data on this question from all over the world. This is not just American data. There are 2 economists that study this, a guy named David Blanchflower over at Dartmouth, and then Andrew Oswald at the University of Warwick in the UK. They've collected data from all over the world that asks, on average, do you get happier or unhappier as you age? Okay, so they have data on China and Sub-Saharan Africa and South America and the United States, all over Europe, the Indian subcontinent, you name it, and the data look all the same every place. Okay, so there's a lot of things that vary from country to country. This thing doesn't, as it turns out. Now, on the first day of my leadership and happiness class at the business school, I asked them this question. Do you think you're going to be happier or unhappier in 10 years? Okay, and it's a question that they've kind of pondered a little bit. They're there to improve their lives so they can be happier. On average, my students are 28 years old at the business school, getting their MBAs. I say, okay, you're 38 years old, happier or unhappier? 95% of them vote happier. Okay, I say, now the other 5% are, French or something. So, sorry guys, I mean, that's there you go, canceled in the first 15 minutes. There you go. It's like, sorry. Anyway, I didn't mean it. Anyway, so I take it back. Yeah, that's right, I know. So, but yeah, Okay, so why do they vote happier? Well, they have to begin with, they're optimists. I mean, to have that kind of student debt, you better be an optimist, right? But I ask them, what's the deal? And they give me a very plausible explanation. They say, I'm going to have the job that I want and the money that I want, and I think I'm going to have a family, which I want, and if I want to have kids, I'm going to have kids that I want. They're going to get all these things, these circumstances are going to be better. I say, okay, plausible, plausible. We study that phenomenon in my class in depth. Then I say, what about 48? And they think about it and they say, probably a little better, because all those things are still going to be better. And I say, okay, now how about 78? And they're like, I don't want that. Oh, I don't want that. I say, how come? What's wrong with 78? And they can't give me a reason. It just sounds like 78 isn't fun. That's all they've got. All right. So then I say, so you're saying, friends, that your happiness is going to go up and up and up and up and up. And it's going to max out and then it's going to start back down again. It's an inverted U shape. And they're like, yeah, I guess that's right. I say, okay, let's look at the data. And I show them data on 500,000 Americans and British citizens, which once again is the same as everybody else in the world. And it's the exact opposite of what they think. On average, people self-evaluate their life happiness compared to the other people that they know between about 7 and 9 over the course, on a 1 to 10 scale, over the course of their adult lives. And what you find is that it generally declines, and this is for the big majority of people, it declines slightly year after year after year from your early 20s until your early 50s. It's exactly the opposite of what they think is going to happen. And then it turns around in your early 50s and it starts back up again. Almost everybody gets a kind of a bonanza of happiness from the early 20s, from the early 50s until 70. And then it breaks up into two groups. It breaks up into two groups at this point. Now this is interesting. Remember the man on the plane? Half of the population keeps going up all the way to death, and the other half of the population starts back down again. Now this is how kind of laying the groundwork for my whole research project at this point. My students at this point, they want an explanation. It's like, I say it's kind of a good news, bad news story, right? I say the bad news is you're getting unhappier. The good news is I'm getting happier. Yeah. But they want to, I mean, they think it's supposed to go up and it goes down. You know, why is that? And it turns out that it has everything to do with the nature of how we define happiness and pursue it. Happiness is not a feeling. Happiness is a combination of three phenomena: enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. That's what happiness is. Those are the macronutrients of happiness. And what do you find? In your 30s and 40s, life is unbelievably complicated, and your enjoyment falls because of the work exigencies and family, and the worst of all, which is teenage kids, and just enjoyment. I remember, by the way, when I was looking at these data, and I was in my late 40s at the time, and I had 3 kids in high school. And my middle son, Carlos, who is just, holy moly, I mean, it was just, he was my middle son. And so middle children, they take 90% of the oxygen, and they think they're getting 10%. And it was every day. You know, it's like Carlos is getting a D in math, and Carlos is failing history. Carlos didn't show up for school today. Carlos disappeared with a car. I mean, it was awful, you know? And my wife, who's such an optimist, she says, you know, at least we know he's not cheating. I wasn't happy. No. Here's the deal, though. Your meaning, your purpose is going up, but that's a long-term play. Your enjoyment is going down, which is a short-term tactic for your happiness. That's the reason it feels like your year-on-year happiness is declining. But then, in your early 50s, something changes. Carlos moves out. Yeah. But by the way, I mean, there's happy endings to these stories. Today, Carlos is, you know, Corporal Carlos Brooks, Scout Sniper, U.S. Marine Corps. Yeah, I'm telling you. He's married. He's 23. He's got it going on. But man, when he was 17, it looked grim. So then it turns around and almost everybody gets a lot happier. But now is the interesting thing that my research is really about. It splits up into two groups, half and half. Half get happier, half get unhappier. Now, I know which group you want to be in. I know which group I want to be in. I know which group the man on the plane was in, and it wasn't the group I want to wind up in. So, next question in the research. Who ends up in which group, and what do they have in common? Okay, now, your intuition tells you exactly the opposite of the truth. Your intuition tells you, be as successful as possible, and you'll be in the upper branch. And that is exactly wrong for two reasons. This is called the striver's curse. The more successful you are in work and worldly things early in your life, the more likely you are going to be in the lower branch in terms of happiness after 70. That's what the data say, and there's two reasons for it. At first, it doesn't make sense, but after a little reflection, it starts to make sense. The first is what's called the burden of high achievers. This is work that's done at the University of Texas at Austin. Two social psychologists named Carol and Charles Holohan, married couple. And what they've done is they've looked at people who are identified before age 20 as being super achievers. You. Hard workers, good grades, making the mark, getting into Harvard. Yep. Those are the people who tend to be most disappointed about their lives after 80. Why? The answer is because you're number one, and that's hard to maintain. It's very hard to live up to your mother's expectations, let alone your own. That's the first reason for the striver's curse. Number two, strivers have a big party in the middle of their life. And when you have a big party, you notice when it's over. That's this law of psycho-professional gravitation. What goes up must come down, and it's no fun coming down. Humans are wired to go up. Humans are not wired to come back down. All happiness comes from progress, and when you're not making progress anymore, friends, you're not going to like it. If you never do anything with your life, you won't know when it's over. You're going to know. What does this mean? That means left up to our devices, being as successful as possible, hoping for the best, achieving until the wheels come off is a terrible strategy if you want to be happy. And you want to be happy. So now the groundwork is laid. What do I do to defeat that? What do you do to defeat that? Now, it's funny because nobody ever asks about great women and men throughout history, about if they died happy. If you read biographies, they always ask, what did they do with their lives? What were the amazing achievements? But they never talk about how they felt about their lives by the end of their lives. And if you look carefully, if you do the work, it turns out it's not pretty in a lot of cases. Let me give you the example of somebody who's just like the man on the plane. This is probably information you never heard before about the great Charles Darwin. Darwin was one of the greatest naturalists of all time. If you had a list of the 3 natural scientists that have changed the world more than any other in the last 500 years, Darwin's on your list. Darwin was an early success. At age 22, he was selected as the naturalist aboard a sailing ship around the world called the Beagle that would sail around the world collecting zoological and plant specimens and sending them back to Europe to be studied all over the world, in Africa and South America, very famously in the Galapagos Islands off Ecuador. And when it was a 5-year voyage. He didn't come home once for 5 years. When he came back after 5 years, he had in his brain something that was going to change science forever. It was like an intellectual atomic bomb. It was called the theory of evolution. Of course. He comes back at 27 and overnight is the most famous scientist in all of Europe. Amazing. I mean, my students are 27. Imagine being the most famous scientist effectively in the world, at least in the West, and having just started your career. He loved it because who wouldn't? He dined out on it, he got rich, he got famous, he started publishing book after book about his theory of natural selection, and for the next 25 years, life, it was just his oyster. Now what happened after this point is where it gets interesting. In his early 50s, all of his scientific progress abruptly halted. The reason was because he had launched 1 million ships of research in his area that he had created, and those ships went forward. Usually, they were navigated by scientists who had more mathematical and statistical ability than he did, and his research overtook him technically. He couldn't read the literature or participate in it anymore after 25 years, and he was no longer able to publish anything that was original. That was the end of his life, as far as he was concerned. He lived more than 20 years after that. He published 11 more books. He thought they were derivative. He thought they were copying earlier work. He thought they were uninteresting. He felt like a fraud and a charlatan, and he died depressed and sad about his life. He might as well have been the man on the plane. It's not good enough to have done heroic acts in the 1970s. You know, people often say, what have you done for me lately? You ask yourself, what have I done for me lately? You need progress, is the bottom line. That's a big problem. So let's start off by asking the question, why do great achievers, why do they wind up on the bottom part of the curve? Why do they get into the striver's crisis? What actually happens to them and the progress that they're trying to make? Wasn't it possible that Charles Darwin and the man on the plane would have been able to keep it going and going and going and stayed happy and, you know, beloved by everybody and remembered all the way to the end of life? And the answer is no. The first mistake is not understanding how we change. Skill number one for people who are incredible achievers and get happier, they understand the nature of their own brains and how their own brains change. They, in short, and I'm going to explain this in a second, get on their second curve. Okay, now, one of the things that you find when you look at the achievement of scientists, you know, people who have a lot of ingenuity, people who are great inventors, for example, is that they tend to get better and better and better at their work through their 20s and 30s, and they tend to max out in their innovative capacity, working memory, ability to focus in their late 30s, and then it starts to decline. This was a phenomenon that was identified in the 1960s and 1970s by Raymond Cattell, a social psychologist in Britain who wrote about intelligence. He called it fluid intelligence. Now, if you look at the average age of the science Nobel Prize winners, physiology, chemistry, and physics, the average age at which they do their Nobel Prize winning work, they win the award later, but they do the Nobel Prize winning work on average when they're 39 years old. The likelihood of doing Nobel Prize winning work at 70 is the same as it is at 20, 0%. That is the same as people who are getting patents for scientific discoveries, 39. 39 is this weird kind of modal age that shows up in the research. You find that, for example, financial professionals do their best work at 39. Surgeons, 39. Lawyers, 39. Air traffic controllers are most accurate at 39. I don't know, it's weird. Your results may differ, but probably not very much, it turns out. This explains burnout. Over across the river, business school professors are talking about burnout all the time. What happens at burnout? The answer is in your mid-40s typically, usually not very much later than that, mid-40s, you realize you're a little bit bored doing the thing that you were really, really good at, and you get restless. There's a reason for that. Once you're past the peak of your fluid intelligence, you no longer make progress. You're still good at what you do. Nobody sees the difference, but you notice a difference yourself. My dentist, best dentist in Needham, Massachusetts, where I live, little town, as you all know, west of here. And at age 43, I mean, she always talked about how much she loves being a dentist. Around age 43, just last year, been seeing her for a few years now, she started taking Fridays off, completely off, to golf. So I said, I thought you loved being a dentist. And she said, I did. I said, do you love golfing? She says, no. I said, why are you doing this? She said, because I was bored and I need something new and maybe this will be fun if I do it long enough. So here's the deal. I didn't explain it to her. I should. Here's what's happening with my dentist. She got better and better and better. She was going up her fluid intelligence curve, which once again is working memory, innovative capacity, ability to learn things quickly and solve problems alone with incredible focus and energy. That sounds an awful lot like you in your 20s and 30s. And you get better, and you get better, and you get better. But after that, somehow it gets harder, and nobody seems to know why. She wasn't making progress anymore. She wasn't learning new skills anymore. It was trickier than it used to be, and that's no fun. The progress principle means that humans were wired to get better every year. Okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean it's all over? Well, the problem with the man on the plane was that when he was at the top of his fluid intelligence curve, he was really famous and he was beloved by everybody, and then he tried to ride that curve for the rest of his life, but he was riding it all the way back down again, and nothing ever gave him full flavor in his career or his life. Horrible news. But there's good news too. Raymond Cattell, the researcher on intelligence, said there's a second intelligence curve that's right behind the first one, but it's different. It's called your crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is not marked by working memory. Your working memory isn't as good as it used to be, and it gets worse and worse for the rest of your life. Now, we know why that is, by the way. People used to say it was some sort of degradation of brain function. It's completely wrong. The reason that you don't remember things after about age 40, and especially after age 50, is because your brain works like a not very efficient library of information. And your library is huge. So what happens is somebody says, hey, how you doing, that you've known for several years, and you can't remember his name. So you have to send your little librarian down the hall to the back of the stacks, into the elevator, to go up to the 5th floor, and he stops for coffee. And by the time he gets back 15 minutes later, he says, that guy's name is Mike. Mike is gone. You feel like an idiot. But you're not an idiot. You just have a big library. The reason that your teenage kid has incredible recall is his library has 1 book in it. That's it. Don't feel so bad. But the lack of working memory is no joke, as is the lack of innovative capacity. It's harder to come up with new ideas autonomously. It's hard to solve problems quickly. It's hard to focus as long as you used to. Why? Because your fluid intelligence is declining. Your crystallized intelligence comes in behind it, however. It increases all the way through your 40s and 50s and 60s and stays high in your 70s and 80s, and as long as God gives you your marbles. This is good news. What is crystallized intelligence? It's your wisdom curve. It's your ability to use your library. Young people don't know how to use their library. Why? Because they're young. Older people, and I'm talking about people over 40, over 50, over 60 in particular, and over 70, are very good, and you'll notice this if you're my age, you're really good at pattern recognition. You're really good at explaining hard concepts. You're really good at taking other people's ideas and blending them and saying, this is like that and this is like that. Young professors come to me who just come out of graduate school and come to Harvard. And they say, what's the secret to getting great teaching evaluations? The answer is, get old. The best teaching evaluations at this university, I kid you not, go to professors over 70. It is not because the students are merciful. There is no mercy at Harvard University, as you all well know. It's because old people explain things better. That's what's going on. Pattern recognition. You can't solve any problem on your own, but you know which problems to solve because you have judgment. That's where it comes in. Now, what this means is, if you want to be successful as you get older, you got to get on that second curve and do things that favor that second curve. I noticed a funny thing. If I go back to when I first finished graduate school, right out of my PhD, I was writing academic papers that were so mathematically sophisticated that I can't read them today. My papers, like by a different guy. Why? Because I don't have the fluid intelligence that I used to have. But today, my main source of research is talking about the science of happiness and the neuroscience of happiness. I'm reading from the academic journals written by other people and talking about them in language that I can share with my audience at the Atlantic of 500,000 people a week. You decide which is more valuable. It depends on your point in life and what you're trying to do. Why? Because my crystallized intelligence is much, much higher than it used to be. So here's the idea. You have to go from your innovator curve to your instructor curve. And each one of you has both. But you got to figure out what that means in what you're doing for a living. Now, a lot of women turn out to be better at this than men are because a lot of men are more sort of dogmatically stuck on their fluid intelligence curve, and they'll write it all the way down into the cellar and have a much worse midlife crisis because they think something's wrong with them. Nothing's wrong with them. They just haven't found and jumped onto their crystallized intelligence curve. So what does it mean? If you're a lawyer, you're a star litigator when you're 30. You're the managing partner when you're 55. If you're in the enterprise economy, you should be a startup entrepreneur at 30. You should be a venture capitalist at 60. You get my point. You should be the academic researcher at 35, and you should be the columnist at 65. You have some version of your crystallized intelligence curve, and this is the first practice of people who are successful and get happier as they get older, is that they get on their second curve. That's skill 1. Okay, skill 2. I'm going to give you 3, by the way. The book is 8 or 9, but I'm going to give you 3. These are the 3 biggies as far as I'm concerned. The second is this. All successful, happy people, people who've done really well in life, Maybe they made a lot of money, maybe they didn't, but they've accumulated a lot of earthly rewards in different denominations. What they all have in common, if they're happier as they get older, is they perfected this incredible skill. They perfected the skill not of getting more, but of having less. They've gone from addition in their lives to skillful subtraction. Now, earlier in my career, when I was still the president of this think tank, I used to go back and forth a lot to Taiwan. I was working a lot with the Taiwanese government on different issues, military issues, et cetera, on behalf of my institution, state visits, et cetera. And every time I'd go, people always said, have you gone to the National Palace Museum in Taipei? And I never had time until finally at one visit I said, I got to go see this thing because everybody says it's literally the best collection of Chinese art and artifacts in the world. I want to see it. But I only had an afternoon. Now, if you're like me, you know enough about museums to know that when something is huge, you shouldn't go try to see it by yourself. It's a mistake. You'll just walk through gallery after gallery after gallery. The only thing you'll remember is the snack bar. Don't do that. So, what do? You hire a guide. And you ask the guide to do this. I want you to explain in depth 10 things. I want to know about where they came from and what was going on and what were the historical circumstances and what's the philosophy behind this thing. I want to know deeply about 10 things. And you'll have a much better experience. So that's what I did. It's the National Palace Museum in Taipei, Taiwan. Now, as I was looking at this 2-ton block of jade carved into an intricate Chinese village, I asked a question. I said, how do I know just looking at it that it's Chinese? You know, even if I'd never left Dayton, Ohio, I'd know this is Chinese. How do I know just looking at it as Chinese? And my guide, who is very well versed in art history but also in philosophy, he said, it's a philosophical difference between two types of art, one Eastern and one Western. Now he had my attention. So what's the philosophical difference? He said, in the West, he answered my question by asking me a question. He said, when I say a work of art yet to be started, what pops into your head? And I said, an empty canvas. He said, correct. That's because you in the West think of art as something that starts with nothing and immaculately conceived, it comes into life by putting brush strokes on the canvas. It goes from nothing to something. He said, when I think of a work of art that is yet to be started, I think of the uncarved boulder of jade inside which exists the finished sculpture. Why? Because I think of a work of art as not adding. I think of a work of art as existing after I subtract. Okay, interesting point. But then he said something that, and this was really actually quite paradigm shifting for me. He said, see, this is the difference between how you Westerners think about your lives and your success differently than we do as well. I said, tell me more. He said, you think of your life as something that starts with nothing and you add until you have the perfect life. Brush strokes, brush strokes, brush strokes. He said, but that's a problem because if you're doing well in your life, about your mid-40s, you can't add a brush stroke that adds anything that makes it better. It's like a Jackson Pollock painting, except not selling for $30 million. It's just dense and dark and full of stuff, right? And it's interesting, right? Because I reflect on that a lot. You know, in my work, I work a lot with very successful, very wealthy people. And they don't know what they want. They just want something. Maybe I'll feel better if I get a boat. No. That's another brush strokes. I have this, it's funny, I have this really close friend. He's one of my closest friends. He's a pioneer in the private equity industry. And he started off on Wall Street when he got out of HBS. And he, long time ago, he's 81 now. I can reflect on all these things honestly. And he said that he looked around at the partners at his firm. They were all guys in those days, of course. And he said, what do these guys have in common? What distinguishes them? He said, they all drive a Mercedes. I guess I got to get a Mercedes. And he asked somebody about it. He says, yeah, you want to be successful? Buy it in cash. He said, okay. And I'm thinking when he's telling me this story, who buys a Mercedes in cash? Drug dealers and private equity managers, evidently. So he said at 32, he finally had enough money. And so he takes a check into the Mercedes dealership. And he's, I'm successful today, he thought to himself. And he plunks it down. And he says, I want my car. They give him the keys. And as he's driving off the lot, he thinks to himself, I should have saved 6 more months and gotten the Ferrari. What happened? What happened was the have more strategy always lowers your satisfaction. Have more, have more, have more, have more, have more. We think satisfaction is a function of having more. But the real model of satisfaction is all the things you have divided by all the things that you want. Now think about that little model in your head. Haves divided by wants. You got two ways to be more satisfied in life. By increasing the numerator, that'll give you a couple of minutes of higher satisfaction, or more efficiently, by decreasing the denominator. You, fellow strivers, don't need a have more strategy. You need a want less strategy. You need to chip away things, especially in the second half of your life. Okay, at the beginning, I get it. You want to put more on the canvas. I get it. Good for you. But when that's full, you need to change metaphor to the sculpture and start chipping away. And that's what all successful, happy people have in common. As the Dalai Lama puts it, which, by the way, we had a wonderful conference with His Holiness the Dalai Lama with my lab, the Leadership and Happiness Lab here at the Kennedy School at his home in Dharamsala not 5 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. And here's what he said. The secret to stable satisfaction is not to have what you want. It's to want what you have. You don't need a bucket list. Today's my birthday. I'm not going to have a bucket list where I take all my desires and cravings and I'm going to imagine having all these wonderful things. I'm going to put together tonight in my solitary thoughts after everybody else goes to sleep, my reverse bucket list. I'm going to make a list of all of the cravings and desires I'm not very proud of, and I'm going to cross them out. And I have power. You know what I'm going to cross out tonight? I'm going to cross out the thing that's attaching me most to the world right now. You know what it is? It's my political opinions. I'm going to cross them out. Want to know why? Because I need more friends. Yeah. What's holding you down? What's making you heavy? Fellow strivers, what do you need to chip away? That's your secret technique, and that's number two. Number three is don't go the striver's route by yourself. You know, it's funny because when I talk to really successful people, they're often really lonely. I mean, I look at this a lot in the course of my work because I've looked at loneliness, and I've worked a lot with Vivek Murthy, who's the Surgeon General of the United States, who's really a specialist as a physician in the neurophysiology of loneliness. And we've worked a lot. I've had him on my show, and we've done a lot of stuff together on this. And he says it's the biggest epidemic that we have over the past 10 years in the United States, including the coronavirus epidemic. He says it's more dangerous, more ongoing, and something we should be more concerned with. When I look at the loneliness data, I see lots of trouble with social media and young people and my students, et cetera. But then I look at people my age, and it's a huge problem. When I look at leaders, it's an enormous problem. I talk to people all day long who will confess to me that they're deeply, deeply lonely. And I'll say, you're a CEO, you're surrounded all day long. Yeah, but it's not the same. It's not right. Here's the deal. Aristotle talked about this 2,500 years ago. He talked about real friendships. Real friends. They're different than deal friends. A lot of you are surrounded by deal friends. You know what deal friends are? They're useful. You know what real friends are? They're useless. I didn't say worthless. I have those too. These are people that are not useful to you. And here's the thing, fellow strivers. You lose these relationships because they're hard to maintain and they take work and they don't happen on their own. You're working 14 hours a day. I got it. You're working tons of time, and the rest of the time, anything you have left, you're a desiccated husk of a human being, and you spend a little time with your family, and you collapse into bed. I know what's going on, and you lost those relationships that were so meaningful to you when you were here at the Kennedy School. You must reestablish these relationships because real friendships are critical, and this is what leaders lack. This is what, when I'm talking to people like the man on the plane, I see a big hole in their life. You know, leaders, they take a little bit of pride in being like a tree, like an aspen tree. You know, it's beautiful. You know, there's yellow leaves that shimmer in the summer sunshine. Look, you might be lonely, but you're solid. You're by yourself, and that's the point. You're growing on your own. You don't need anybody else, and people can take comfort and shelter under you. That's how leaders think of themselves. That's how strivers think of themselves. I was using that metaphor at the Aspen Ideas Festival some years ago. It's where I often speak in the summer. And somebody who knows a lot more about botany than me said, that's a bad metaphor. And I said, well, thank you for your feedback. But tell me more. And he said, do you understand how an aspen grove grows? And I said, actually, I don't. He said, an aspen tree is not one plant. Every aspen tree in a single aspen grove is one plant. Today, the world's largest living organism, as a matter of fact, the largest living organism in the history of planet Earth is alive. It's in Utah. It's called Pando. It's an aspen grove with one single root system that's 106 acres and 6 million kilograms of wood. This is important as a metaphor for all of us, right? Because your individuality is an illusion. There's a famous koan, a riddle in Zen Buddhism. And the koan, it asks this. It's almost a cliche at this point. What is the sound of one hand clapping? But senior monks will confront junior monks with this koan. I've seen it myself studying Zen Buddhism. I'm not a Zen Buddhist. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've become a much better Catholic by studying the Zen Buddhist koans, as a matter of fact. Why? Because this koan is intended to help people understand the nature of illusion. The sound of one hand clapping is an illusion. It looks like it's making sound, but it isn't. And it's intended for all of us to understand the nature of ourselves. You, strivers, are an illusion individually. The sound of your life, the existence, comes into full play only when another hand is added. Only when other people are added to your life. And this is what happy strivers find in fullest expression after age 70. But you got to start working on it much earlier, because you can't start that late, generally speaking. Here's the deal. You know what lonely strivers have in common? They're still trying to polish their leaves, and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. You know what happy strivers have in common? They're cultivating their roots, and that gets better and better and better. Look at the next tree over. That's you. And that's what they all understand, those who are happy. Your family, your friends, your loved ones, your classmates, the people that you hold dear. That's you, is the bottom line. And that's what all of the happy strivers have in common. They're cultivating their roots as opposed to polishing their leaves. If you're not doing it yet, the time is now to start. Now, you might be asking yourself, because I've given you 3 ideas here. They're all kind of straightforward. Your grandmother would say, yeah, that makes sense. Why do we forget these things? And this gets back to something that Nick said early on in the introduction. I was interviewing this incredibly successful titan of Wall Street, a woman exactly my age, for this book, for this research. And she was confessing what a lot of very successful people will confess to me. I mean, ever since I've done this research, I hear from actors, I hear from professional athletes that are trying to retire and they don't know how. I hear from very famous entrepreneurs, and they all sort of say the same thing. What she said to me, I mean, she was a billionaire. She had started a firm, bears her name, but she says, I'm not happy. And I said, why not? She says, well, my husband and I were roommates. She said, I have kind of a cordial relationship with my adult kids. I'm not making crisp decisions in my firm. I don't think people have confidence in me anymore, but I don't know what to do. My health is starting to suffer a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to the gym like I should. I think I drink too much. What do I do, Professor? She said, you don't need a Harvard professor to tell you what to do. You just diagnosed yourself. You know exactly. You need to step back from your firm and take a souvenir in it. You need to go away with your husband. You need to address your drinking. You need to get to know your children. You need to go back to the gym. You need to take care of yourself. For Pete's sake, why don't you do those things? She says, I know. But I guess I've always chosen to be special rather than happy. Boom. That was like a knife to my heart when I heard that. Want to know why? Because me too. I can't tell you how many times I spent that 14th hour in the office instead of the first hour with my children when they were little. And then they grew up. And I missed it. Not all of it, but too much of it. Now, they forgive me. They move on. And I get a do-over. 3 weeks ago, my first grandson was born. Yeah, I mean, you know. His dad is 24, you know. I mean, raise them Catholic, they do Catholic stuff, I always say, right? 9 months to the minute after the wedding. Is all, you know. I'm not going to screw it up again, friends. I'm not going to mess this up again. I'm just not. And you shouldn't either. None of us should. I'm proud that you're strivers that came out of the Harvard Kennedy School. But remember that the happiness that you seek is not what you learned at the Kennedy School, and it's not going to come naturally by following your desires to be successful. You have to do these things of getting on your second curve on purpose, of learning to chip away instead of adding, of cultivating your roots instead of just polishing your leaves, and choosing happiness over specialness. If you do that, then you can actually be special and happy. And the happy part is worth a whole lot more. Now, one of the things that makes me truly happy is the ability to talk about this and share these ideas, is actually to become the professor of this. And one last word before I turn it over to you. There's only one policy school in the world that would support this work. Literally, there is no other university that has this kind of school that would have a leadership and happiness laboratory that purports to make every leader that I possibly can reach a happiness teacher. I have 100 professors from other universities all over the world coming here to learn this methodology of the neuroscience and social science of happiness. Why is that possible? Because we have great leadership and creative people at the helm, but also because of you. You support this work out and about by talking about your alma mater, by supporting it with your philanthropy. If it weren't for you, this wouldn't be happening. I'm proud to be among you. I'm proud to be a faculty member in the school that you went to. And if I can ever do anything to make this come alive more for you, I'm very, very easy to find. I'm deeply grateful to you for this. Thank you. All right. Thank you. We have a little bit of time. I know this is the last session. Thank you. I really appreciate that an awful lot. I mean, it's so meaningful to me. And you know, the great thing about alumni is that you don't have to call me professor anymore, so that's great. That just doesn't fit the rhythm of the song. I would love to hear what's on your mind. We have a little bit of time, and I know that some of you are running for flights. I will not be offended if any of you have to leave. But we have until, if we want it, we've got a few minutes. We have actually until 2. And anything that's on your mind, I'd love to hear from you. We've got some mics, so get behind the mics or just yell it out, and I'll start right here. Yes, sir.
Sure. Daniel Rosenberg, New York City, MPP 1998.
Right on.
I've learned a lot from you today.
Thank you.
I would imagine a lot of people have too. Really incredible.
Thank you.
You are a striver. You get to speak in front of this audience, many audiences. You've talked about happiness. There are a lot of people that can explain things, right? But for the moment, imagine I've known you since the 9th grade.
Right.
Right? We're older.
Right.
We just came together. I actually was a deep friend of yours. And so I can have a real conversation with you.
Right.
And I ask you, are you happy? And not the theory of happiness, but I'm one of your oldest friends.
Yeah.
What are you going to tell me?
You'd probably start by saying, why are you doing this on your birthday? But anyway, that's the... Strivers got to strive, man.
So a real answer, basically, is what I'm asking.
A real answer besides... See, you would have noticed a big improvement in my life. The reason I study happiness is because I want it. This isn't research. This is me search. I know everybody who does serious science of happiness work in the United States today. We're a very small community. They all want more of it because they're all below average. And serious study of this makes you a lot better. Here's the thing. It doesn't come naturally. Mother Nature doesn't care. The economy doesn't care. The entertainment industry doesn't care. The government certainly doesn't care. No. But you have to care, and you have to take it seriously. So you got to do the work, change your life, and share it with others so you remember it forever. And when I retired, when I was 55 from the American Enterprise Institute, the reason I did, because I wasn't happy. I was not happy. The reason I came here to teach this and do this thing that I'm doing right now is because I wanted to. And if you took my class at the Harvard Business School on this, you'd have to take 16 tests to evaluate your own happiness. We have good psychometrically valid tests on mood and happiness and unhappiness and values and everything else, and we take a full battery so you can understand and map you. And I do this every year to keep up with my class. And since I've been doing this, my happiness is up 60%.
So is it the...
Am I happy? No.
Is it the work you do, or is it the roots?
It's the work. And I'm not happy because none of you can be happy. None of you can be happy. Happy, at least on this side of the mortal coil. But you can be happier. Happiness is not a destination. Happiness is a direction. And the job is for you to do the work and do it seriously and get happier as years go by. And it doesn't happen on its own. That's the most important thing for all of us to keep in mind. Some people are just super, super, super lucky. I got data that show that 50% of your happiness is genetic. I got bad genetics. I had gloomy parents and gloomy grandparents. And that means I need better habits. And the habits are what I cultivate. And I cultivate it through learning and changing my lifestyle and passing it on to you. And I'm privileged to do so. Thank you. Wayne, the golfer. I saw you clapping when I said about golf.
Yeah. You know something? The only way people over 50 make new friends is to play golf.
Well, one note about that, by the way. There's a big literature that asks about how people make friends over 50. That is kind of true for men.
Yep.
Men tend to bond over activities. Women bond more over feelings. And this is not entirely, I mean, there are some women who bond over activities and men who bond over feelings. But this is a pretty big gender difference that is actually being established in the literature, as it turns out. So, guys will go to baseball together and build bird houses together and golf together. And the key thing is you can't be looking at each other, right? You got to be looking at something else, and then suddenly you can make these friends. Women look at each other. It's very awkward. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's not your question. Yeah.
And my question, though, is this. You talked about sort of the Western notion that we're going to add more to the canvas. We're going to add more to the canvas. And at some point, you can't add it anymore, and
right.
You don't have the capacity. But it's not just you can't add anymore. At some point, you start to lose things from the canvas. You lose the people you love. You lose people who are essential to you as a person.
Right.
And how do you balance the loss against the happiness?
It's a good question. So here's how I deal with that in my class. There's 4 things that you need to accumulate over the course of your life. And there's 4 things you think you need to accumulate over the course of your life that are wrong. Okay, now, this is a game that I play with my students called What's My Idol? St. Thomas Aquinas in 1265 wrote the Summa Theologica. He was an incredible social scientist. And he said that there are these 4 idols, and everybody, with no exceptions, pursues one or more of these idols. They are money, power, pleasure, and honor, which would mean fame or admiration or prestige. Money, power, pleasure, and honor. Those are the worldly idols, and everybody has their weakness. Every time you do something you're not proud of in your life and it ends badly, it's because you were chasing your idol, according to Aquinas. Now, the game that we play is I make my students think about it and start eliminating the ones they don't care about until they get to the last one that they can't live without. And I say, watch that, because that's what's going to hurt you. Okay, when I'm talking about the reverse bucket list, those are the things to start crossing out. Here are the things to keep accumulating, because here are the habits of the happiest people, right? This is directly responsible for 25% of your happiness, which will also improve your circumstances and manage your genetics. Okay, 4 things: your faith, your family, your friendship, and your work. Okay, now, take some explanation. I don't mean my faith. My faith is literally the most important thing in my life. But as a social scientist, I will tell you that my faith is not the only way to do this. You need something transcendental to you. Faith, spirituality, meditations, philosophy, I don't care if you are atheist or not, you need something bigger than you. 2, family life. Never, never, never lose contact with your family for any reason besides abuse. And political differences of opinion are not abuse. Okay? No joke. 1 in 6 Americans is not talking to a direct family member today because of politics. That's what this culture has done to us, right? Number 3 is friendship, and we talked about real friends versus deal friends. By the way, the apex of family and friendship is your spouse. Okay, that crosses those 2 dimensions. And last but not least is work. And work has only 2 things that actually bring joy. They're not money, not power, not prestige, none of that. Not government versus private sector, all that washes. The only 2 things that matter are earning your success, believing you're creating value with your life and valuing the lives of other people and it's recognized, and you're serving others and you know who they are. Those are the 2 things. Those are the things to accumulate. So what do we need to focus on, Wayne? We need to stop thinking about the things that are our idols and create the space in our life to actually think about the good for. If we do that, I guarantee you we can all do it. Thank you for that, Wayne. That's a great question. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
I was lost. I read your book. I'm still lost.
Get the next book.
No, it came in a very good moment. My classmates know because I've been talking about your book all the weekend.
Yeah.
But I'm an engineer, so I need a method. So all these ideas are very good and so on. But I'm still trying to jump to the second curve.
Right.
Are there any books that you would recommend? Some kind of method? Because this is not enough, at least for me. It's a great book. It changed my life.
Yeah, thank you.
The first chapter is really depressing. Because it's like a mirror saying you're in decline.
Yeah, I got to get your attention, man. I got to get your attention.
What kind of method would you suggest to jump to the second curve?
Okay, so good question. So, and you know what I'm going to say. I mean, it's like the first text message I got this morning was from Oprah Winfrey, because she's my to wish me happy birthday, because we've been spending all this time together. What are we writing about? We're writing about how to manage yourself. Because moving from one curve to the second curve is how to manage yourself. And after the book came out, she read it and called me and said, how can we be more specific about how to do that? Same question you just asked me. So how do you do that? We talk about emotional self-management. That starts with a very key technique. This is the biggest change of thinking that my HBS students get for the very first time. They think that to be happier, things in the outside world have to change. Like things that, I'm being held back with happiness because, people aren't treating me right, or my relationships aren't going right, or I don't like my employer. And when outside circumstances change, then I'll start to get happier. And that's exactly wrong. You need to actually understand a process called metacognition. Now, metacognition is awareness of yourself. Once you start studying yourself, you can react to the natural signals in your life, and in the reaction, you can change your life dramatically. That's what the new book is about. It's called Build the Life You Want. It literally means build your life like an enterprise. And let me give you an example of more or less how this works. The limbic system of your brain, a very ancient set of structures in your brain, it gives you your feelings. Your happiness and your disgust and sadness and anger and fear and surprise and joy and sense of love and all these basic emotions. They're signals to you about the outside world. You can be thrown about on the seas of these things, wonder what to do. Why do I have all these feelings? It turns out with a relatively straightforward process that can come from meditation or therapy or journaling or lots and lots of ways that you do that, but that require studying you, that you can actually manage all of those sensations. And in so doing, you can manage the course of your life very, very effectively. What do I recommend? Well, for some of you, I recommend therapy. For some of you, I do recommend meditation or pursuing the faith of your youth, or maybe I would recommend going on a pilgrimage or on a silent retreat. But you need to do the work. The one big mistake that most people make is they lead a completely unexamined life. The most interesting thing in your life should be what's going on in your head. That should be the most interesting thing that's happening. So you can say to yourself, I don't like this thing and I don't know why. I'm feeling sad today. What's up with that? To say things like, I don't know what this day will bring, but I do know it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be something that I can actually study. And in so doing with these metacognitive techniques, you'll be able to re-engineer yourself to go from one place to the second place, because you will no longer be manipulated emotionally to staying on what you used to be good at. So a whole set of techniques like that will actually work for you, me, and everybody. And trust me, they're working for me. Thank you for that. Thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
St. Fomer, MPP, 2009. And this is really deeply personal, and I really appreciate what you said, and for two reasons. One, I've had a tremendous relationship with my dad, and he's a mentor for me, and very successful. I saw him hit this peak, and he's been kind of downhill, and it's not only affected him, but it's affected me in my relationship with him. So one, you mentioned faith and family, and he's a deeply faithful person, but it wasn't enough to get him through this, and so there's something more that has to translate. So how can you help someone who you're seeing go through this? And then two, I just hit 40 2 months ago, and so it's deeply personal.
Welcome to the club. It's okay.
Deeply personal for me because I've left that 39 period, and I don't know why I've been struggling about this. I was like, 40 is just a number. Why is this affecting me so much more than any other birthday I've ever had? And it's interesting. I'm here with my daughter who's 13, and we were in Mecca in December. And we climbed up to the cave where Prophet Muhammad received revelation. And it gave me goosebumps because when I was there, and this is the only place in Mecca that hasn't changed because it's just a cave versus everything else has just changed. So it's like very much what he experienced. He was 39 when he received revelation, exactly at that age. And he had been going to that cave, meditating for weeks and months at a time, and almost like something like we would consider a midlife crisis. And that was when there was this opening, and the Quran is translated as the wisdom, right? And so I felt like there's this connection between faith and family, and very personal for when you hit that 39 age yourself, you're seeing your parents potentially, or elderly people that are kind of going through that other split in that curve. So if you can
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. That is obviously personal, and one of the things that's quite interesting in my world of social psychology and behavioral economics is that you notice that on decadal birthdays, people tend to make big changes in their life. Why? Because they see the clock ticking. I mean, they feel like there's a time constraint, whereas they didn't. 39, look, I turned 59 today. I mean, it's not 59, but talk to me in a year, and I'm going to be like, ugh, that's a 6. Is that a 6? How is that a 6? And I'm going to be more likely, because people tend to be more likely to be having these types of introspective moments. Now, use these moments is the key thing. When you're focused on it, you got to focus on it more. It's funny because this is what crises do to people that's incredibly productive. You know, a finance guy calls me 2 weeks ago, and he says, he read the book, and he said, I want to make a bunch of changes in my life. He's an old friend of mine. So, I said, what do you want to do? He says, I want to sell everything. He owns a lot of stuff. He's very rich, and he has a boat, and he has a plane, and he has a bunch of houses, and he has a lot of art, and the whole thing is, I want to sell it all. I says, why do you want to sell it all? You out of money? He says, no, I got plenty of money. He says, but I'm not on my game anymore, and these are trophies that are mocking me. That's the progress principle in action, my friends. That's the progress principle in action. And I said to him, this is good, but here's the danger. You have some good times in the market. That's dangerous, because then you're going to take your eye off the ball and start accumulating trophies again, and it's only going to get worse. Use your misery is the bottom line. Now, you first started by talking about your dad. Cognitive decline? Cognitive decline.
Just, I think happiness. It really is happiness.
Happiness,
I think
okay.
he has the potential, and I don't know what the source of it is, but he just isolating, very successful, but then just becoming negative, those types of things.
Give him the book. So, give him the book. If you need to, just send me an email, and I'll send you a copy of the book signed to your dad. I mean, look, again, you can't leave it up to chance, and now you know a lot of what's going on. I mean, we talked about this. There's a lot more that goes into it. People get on that downward slope and wonder why, and wish it weren't that way. And you don't have to wish. You can do a lot of the things that we're talking about here, but in much greater specificity. So I'm delighted to help in any way. Okay.
Thank you.
But the key thing for you is this. I mean, you're noticing that the Prophet Muhammad had this great, incredible, this moment.
Yeah.
He had a vision. It was a revelation that happened in that time. You're probably not going to get that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. But you might get something, but you won't if you don't put yourself in that circumstance. So here's what I would recommend. I would recommend have you done your Hajj?
Yes, I have.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Do another.
Do another one.
Do another one. You can.
Yes.
You can't just do one. Go on a pilgrimage. Go on a pilgrimage, a silent pilgrimage. I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is all the way across northern Spain. I was praying my rosary. I was with my wife, but we were silent and we were thinking and we were praying and we were praying and we were praying, and all I had to do was make forward motion. It's a metaphor for your life, just walking. This is your life. Where am I going? I don't know. This is very famous, by the way, another Zen Buddhist koan where a senior monk and a junior monk meet on the road, and the junior monk says to the senior monk, he said, "Where are you walking?" And he said, "I'm on a pilgrimage." And the junior monk says, "Where's your pilgrimage taking you?" And the senior monk says, "I don't know." He says, "Why don't you know?" And he says, "Because not knowing is the most intimate form of knowledge." Think about that one a little bit. You need a little bit more intimate knowledge of the secret, serious business of you, and you're only going to get it in the silence that comes when you expose yourself to that trajectory that doesn't necessarily have the destination that you're going to expect. And all of us, that's what actually comes from doing the work. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dan Pike.
Hey, Dan.
1998, mid-career.
Right on.
I was 41 then. I'm 66 now, so this is useful information.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I got from the Kennedy School was sort of synthesizing different bits of information that are provided, and I think the breadth of teaching that we were exposed to was helpful. And I took a class when I was here called Risk and Resilience Among School Children, and I see some parallels of a sort between the things that will give children resilience to get through really bad situations,
right,
and the tools that you give us to find how to move from a situation that could become bad, I mean,
right,
tragic, like the gentleman on the airplane you talk about, to something better. And I was wondering if you ever think about working with some of the other folks that are working on this seemingly different, but yet I think connected issue.
Yeah, so one of the most important points that I try to get when I'm teaching either doing corporate teaching or teaching to my students here at Harvard or guest lecturing at other universities. One of the, back in the 60s, which I don't remember, Woodstock happened when I was 5, and I didn't go because my parents were squares. And but that generation, there was kind of a saying, which is, if it feels good, do it. That's terrible advice for happiness. You will ruin your life. Because you'll look for pleasure over enjoyment. You'll become an addict. You'll chase the wrong things. Mother Nature will lead you astray if you just do what feels good. You need to do the work. Today, there's a different kind of motto among a lot of young adults, but along a lot of the rest of us as well, which is, if it feels bad, make it stop. Right. If I'm suffering, it's evidence of defectiveness and it must stop. Every single one of you knows that's false. Now, you can have too much suffering. I understand how mental illness works. But suffering befalls all of us. And the idea of going through life trying to avoid suffering, disappointment, pain, trouble, that's craziness. And the reason is basically this. Remember, happiness, as I mentioned before, is enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. Enjoyment takes work so you can convert pleasure into enjoyment and get happier. Satisfaction means deferring your gratification, and it only comes with struggle. And meaning or purpose only comes when bad things are happening to you. You don't ever say, you know how I figured out my purpose in life? It was that week at the beach in Ibiza. Nobody has ever said those things. As the truth of the matter is, you need to understand suffering, you need to embrace suffering, you need to learn from suffering, you need to grow from suffering. And that's a very important thing, and that's a whole set of skills that I talk about an awful lot. Happiness requires unhappiness. If you're running away from unhappiness, you are running away from happiness. That's the bottom line, is what that comes to. And so when I talk about, I work with people who do work in post-traumatic growth, for example, but it doesn't have to be that catastrophic. Something bad's going to happen to you today. When you start each day, say, I'm grateful for the good things that are going to happen today. I'm grateful for the bad things that are going to happen to me this day. I make my students keep a failure journal, where anytime something really bad happens to them, which is frequently, they'll write in their journal, this bad thing happened, and they have to leave 2 lines blank underneath it. They have to come back after 30 days, and in the first line, write, what did I learn from that? And 6 months later, they have to come back and say, what's one really good thing that happened because of that? And after about the 4th entry into this, they start looking forward to when something bad happens and putting it in the journal, because they get to go back and look at all the good things that happened before, and they reframe unhappy moments and bad problems and all of the things, because they start to see that as the source of their growth, and that's what all of us can actually do. Thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm Mary Jo McGuire, also 1998 mid-career MPA.
Great.
Thank you so much for your work here. I'm so grateful that you're doing it and that you're bringing it out to us, and this was a great talk. I have read a lot about the positive attitude, so I kept thinking one of your points was going to be have a positive attitude. So I'm just curious, I'm sure it's interwoven in much of this, but there's a lot that's been written about that. And then my short question is, who was the guy on the plane behind you?
So, So under advice of counsel, the guy in the plane will remain anonymous. I'll just say that he's litigious. So it could be any of 1,000 people. I know you're speculating on that. But okay, so what about the positive attitude? And this gets into a couple of, it's a much deeper area. I mean, the whole idea of the power of positive thinking. This was a whole movement of self-improvement in the 1980s and 1990s that was really spearheaded by this Presbyterian minister named Norman Vincent Peale, who wrote a famous book called The Power of Positive Thinking. And he would recommend that you would recite the Psalms every morning when you woke up and say, "This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And by the way, I recommend that you do that. Why not, is the whole point. But it's not enough. Now, a lot of times, if you're going to do one thing, people will give you a happiness hack, like making a gratitude list. And my students make gratitude lists. What do? That means on Sunday, for example, if this is your day, you'll write 5 things that you're really grateful for in your life. And then each night, before you go to bed, you'll ponder that list for 5 minutes. And on Sundays, you'll update that list. And the data say that by the end of 10 weeks, you'll be about 25% better mood than you were before. It's free, it's good, but it's not a learning thing exactly. The whole point is to be fully alive in all of the things that you're feeling and not drawn down by running away from the bad and simply trying to get the good feeling. Trying to get the good feeling is kind of like trying to get the cookie over and over and over again. It's to live this full human existence where you're not afraid of any of the experiences that you have and you're ready with courage to say, bring it on, good and bad. And I'm not going to react to the bad things by saying, I love that. Because of course you don't love that. You're gonna react to it in a way that is what a normal adult human being would do, to say, this is suboptimal at this particular moment, but boy, oh boy, is this ever valuable, what's happening to me at this moment. And once you get better at that, then it matters less to you. I mean, the gratitude list, too, it's good. Why? Because we have a negativity bias in our outlook. We've evolved a tendency to look at the bad, and it's unrealistic. The reason is because understanding the bad keeps us alive. The good attitude is nice to have, but not paying attention to the bad, if there's a saber-toothed tiger behind you, can be deadly. You won't pass on your genes or survive, which is what Mother Nature wants for you. So by all means, keep a good attitude about these things, but go deeper. Is exactly what I'm thinking. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes, sir?
Good afternoon. My name is John Crowley. I'm mid-career 2008.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You got your cheering session here, John.
I have
Yeah.
It's an audience. As a classical musician, I received, and who's moved into data science after Kennedy School, I'm dealing with a dissonance between two systems over a topic that hits in the second half of your curve, retirement. I have a classical music tradition where I come from. My teacher's teacher was Pablo Casals, who had famously been asked in the cello, had been asked at 93, "Why do you still practice?" And he answered, "Because I think I'm finally making progress." There's a notion, like most classical musicians, there's no concept of retirement. You stop performing slowly over time, but it switches over into this curve of like crystal intelligence, where you're using your wisdom, your accumulated oral history, the ability to teach as a mechanism of keeping yourself alive and vibrant. Meanwhile, we have this tradition on the data science or the tech side of like, well, you'll succeed, and then at some point there's an end point and there's a phase shift, and something else happens. And it seems almost in this curve, maybe some of this might be skewed data, in terms of maybe we need a few more classical musicians in there. But what do we need to reconceive in the structure of retirement in order to really do good on that crystal intelligence?
What do you play? You play a cellist.
I'm a cellist.
You're a cellist, okay. So the first 12 years of my career, I was a professional classical musician. I actually was the principal French horn player in the Barcelona Symphony. And from when I left, I dropped out of college when I was 19, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I went on the road playing chamber music. I played 2 years with Charlie Bird, the jazz guitar player. And then I spent a bunch of seasons in Barcelona. And I did that till I was 31. And I finished college when I was 30, actually, by correspondence. And so my whole first part of my career is as a classical musician. It's what I thought about. It's what I lived and breathed and dreamed. And it was it's funny because I actually my worlds will collide. One time when I was the president of this think tank, I was doing this 2,000 person gala event in downtown Washington, D.C., black tie, dignitaries, senators, heads of state, and the whole thing. We had a band. And afterward, the drummer from the band comes down from the bandstand afterward, and he says, "Are you Arthur Brooks?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you the boss of this whole thing?" And I said, "Well, yes I am." And he said, and he identified himself as a guy I made a record with in the 80s, the drummer. And he looks at me and he says, "What happened to you, man?" like, I'm not homeless. I mean, anyway, so it just gives you a little window into the classical musician's soul. There have been a bunch of interesting neurophysiological research agendas and papers in social science that look at the trajectory of careers of classical musicians. And what do you find? Generally, the greatest level of technical prowess that most will self-report is late 30s. As most will say that my best technique now. Some people are quite different in that because they tend to bloom kind of late. Some are early. I burned out in my mid-20s. I just wasn't playing as well as I had before. And I had to leave because I just wasn't making any progress anymore. So I was precocious in my decline, as it turns out. But it has something to do with a fluid intelligence curve. But just as you suggest, people become much better at teaching classical instruments after 40 and 50. And the reason is because they see everything. They start to see it's all about pattern recognition. And so it's so much so that you'll find people who retire actively from playing, whose technique goes way downhill, but they're still great teachers. So remember Dorothy DeLay, for example. Dorothy DeLay at Juilliard wasn't playing anymore, but she was teaching better than she ever had before because she was fully on the crystallized intelligence curve. What do we need? In classical music, we need a pathway to excellence in instruction. That's what we need. We have an expectation that master players become master teachers, especially after 40 and 50, and they're rewarded for that. We need this in academia in general, by the way. The highest prestige comes from publication. And what we need is pathways into the excellence in teaching that have just as much pay and just as much prestige, right? I mean, And that's actually what we need in almost every area of what we're trying to do. You need to make coaches, mentors, professors, teachers, instructors. And it doesn't matter if you're working for a law firm or you're playing in a symphony orchestra, that should be the case. That's my view. Thank you for that, and thank you for your work. Yeah. All right, we got one last question because it's 1:58 and you got to get out of here and get your flights. Yeah.
Then I'll give it to my colleague who's been waiting longer than I have. Yeah.
You know what? I'm taking both of you. So that's right. Yeah.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tariq Zaidan, class of MPA 2018. Thank you so much for the powerful insight that posits that happiness seems to be inversely proportional to the accumulation or the desire to accumulate.
Right.
And very prominently, you mentioned particularly the desire to accumulate capital.
Right.
So if we are to extrapolate this insight onto the socioeconomic systems we inhabit, would you then support the statement that people living under capitalism are doomed for a life of perpetual and chronic misery?
No, and there's a reason for that, because that's a smart question. That's an important question. The truth of the matter is that it doesn't matter what system you're under, you will try to accumulate. If you're in a monarchic system, if you're in socialism, some of the greatest accumulative, acquisitive, absolute selfishness that I've ever seen was behind the Iron Curtain before the fall of the Soviet Union. I've never seen behavior like that was less human and more acquisitive than I've seen under those circumstances. The problem is never the system. The problem is our morals. The problem is our values. You have to work on your values first, then put a system on top of your values, is the way that it works. My own view is that when we have more economic liberty, we can do a lot for a lot of people. We can pull lots and lots of people out of poverty, but it becomes a tyranny to us when we don't have the values that are underlying it, and that's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now. Look, I ran a think tank that talked an awful lot about economic systems, and I said, I gotta get to the root of this thing, because economic systems, not good enough. If you're putting any sort of system on top of bad values, you're going to get bad outcomes, is the bottom line. And that's the reason that I don't think that torquing the economic system away from acquisition without doing anything about our values or having a new kind of enlightenment is going to do anything except take away freedom. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Hi,
So we have 3 people who like capitalism here. Okay, that's right. Yeah.
Hi, Namrata here from MPA class of 2018 as well.
Yeah, right on.
Rabble rousers. But yeah, thank you so much for that. My question is related to the transience of things. So one of my favorite poems, which I've revisited a lot over the past few years, is by Rumi, and it's called The Guest House.
Yeah.
And it talks about your body being like a vessel, which is a guest house. So even emotions like sadness or like sorrow, anger, you welcome them in and you give them tea and you smile at them and say hello,
Yeah.
and then they go away. And it's true with happiness as well. So I suppose my larger question is, how do you study something and put measures to something that is so transient and subjective
Yeah.
for each of us? That's one. And sort of linked to this is, and I'm just speaking subjectively as per my own personal experiences, when I reflect on my past self or past selves, I look at my younger self and I think differently about how happy I was or wasn't as my younger self.
Right.
And even that is quite different, because how I perceived myself back then was probably that I was less happy.
Right.
But now when I look back, my memories are more rose-tinted.
Right.
So I suppose the question to you is, how do you measure that when
okay.
it's so complex?
So it's good question. So to begin with, this is a big problem if happiness is a feeling. But happiness isn't a feeling. Feelings of happiness are evidence of happiness. It's like your Thanksgiving dinner. It's not the same thing as the smell of your Thanksgiving dinner. The smell of your Thanksgiving dinner is evidence of your Thanksgiving dinner. Your happy feelings are evidence of your actual happiness. Your happiness is your levels of enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. So it's a real thing that we can actually measure, we can look at, we can manage, we can increase, we can share, we can bring to other people in abundance. Sometimes we're going to get those feelings and sometimes we're not. It's very important that we understand that the way that we manage our feelings is through the metacognitive process that we were talking about. So you can manage the feelings as well, but don't rely on your feelings. Don't say, my happiness is a feeling, so I hope I'm happy tomorrow. Do the work is the whole bottom line. Now, the second part of what you're talking about was, tell me one more thing, just remind me the second
About
part.
your past self and how you
Oh yeah,
how
why is it that it's funny, I talk to, first year college students and they're always really lonely and they want to go home. But then when they graduate from college, they come back for their reunions and they laugh and laugh about that first semester when they had all these experiences. Why is that? And the answer is because this is one of the most beautiful things about memory. We don't misremember. We edit the memories to the things that are continuing to benefit us now, stripping away the things that were trying to alert us to threats then. It's called fading affect bias. Fading affect bias is this thing where you remember the things that you learned and that are benefiting you still today, the relationships that you actually built, and you shed the things that don't matter anymore. And this is the good thing. This is the reason that times past give you a sense of reminiscence, because of your fading affect bias. This is one of the reasons that you should never, never, never resist change in your life. Change is a funny thing, because when you don't resist it, you get more fading affect bias later. It's going to hurt now, but more fading affect bias later. So I'll just simply close on this idea about the changes that are happening in your life, in my life, in all of our lives. How should you be thinking about those changes? More importantly, when should you and how should you be thinking about the painful times in your life? They're inevitable. When I was a kid, I grew up in Seattle. And when I was a kid, I really was crazy about fishing. Nobody fished in my family. I just, had my paper route, and I took all my money and bought gear and tackle and books and learned how to fish. And I remember when I was 11 years old, I had this ambition to fish in the ocean for the first time. I'd never done it before. So my aunt had this trailer that she lived in on the Oregon coast. And I went down and I was on the rough rocks off the Oregon coast with my little fishing pole and a little bit of bait. And I was casting out one day, 11 years old, I was catching nothing. 3 hours, catching nothing. And this old guy comes up to me. He lives in town. He's got a house, some shack, and he comes to me. He says, "Hey kid, I've been watching you." I mean, today he'd be arrested, obviously. But but he says, "Hey kid, are you catching anything?" And I said, "No." "Are you getting any bites?" And I said, "No." He said, "It's because you're doing it wrong." "What do you mean, sir?" And he said, "You're fishing at the wrong time. You're not going to get any bites until you wait for the falling tide." And I said, "What's that?" The falling tide is a point when the tide is going out that is rushing out especially fast between the rocks. And it doesn't make sense, right? You're not going to catch fish then because everything's going out to sea. And that's what I said. He said, no. When that happens, it's so rough that it's stirring up the plankton and bait fish, and the game fish will bite everything. It's happening in 45 minutes. He had his pole. So we sat there and waited. And then he looks at his watch and he says, "Now." And we throw our lines in and we start pulling fish out, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Half an hour. It's unbelievable. Exhausted. At the end, we're sitting on the rocks, and he's starting to get kind of philosophical afterward. And he lights up a cigarette. He says, "Hey kid, during a falling tide, you can only make one mistake." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Not having your line in the water." You get my point. For some of you, you're in a falling tide. Don't resist. Get your line in the water. If you do, you'll get fading affect bias. If you do, you'll learn a lot. If you do, you'll grow. If you do, you can share. And this difficult point in your life, which if not happening now, gonna happen soon, can be some of the most beautiful set of experiences and growth that you'll have in your whole life. Thank you very much. Thank you.